Psalm 109 has a reputation of being the most dramatic of the imprecatory psalms. It's got the most curses per verse of any imprecatory psalm that's out there. And again, we don't know the occasion for this psalm. David, of course, had enemies from the time of Saul to the time of Absalom. He was a king. So there were always people who wanted to trip him up, who wanted to assassinate him, who wanted to rule. They thought he could do better than they could do better than he could. So I'm sure as a king, as a leader, he always felt this. But this must have been a pretty low time in his life, because the curses in here are very strong. In fact, there are some denominations that have eliminated this psalm from their regular scripture readings because it's just kind of rough. It's kind of cringy at some points. And I think in order to appreciate psalms like this, you really have to have been a victim of some kind of injustice. And I think if you have truly been victimized by someone else and someone in power over you, and you are powerless and you were abused in some way, I think you could pray this psalm a little easier. If you haven't experienced that kind of trauma, it may be a little hard to understand, but I think we need to place ourselves in the life of someone who has experienced a deep wounding and injustice at the hands of someone else. When we do that, this prayer makes a lot more sense, and perhaps we can understand where the psalmist is coming from. The psalm begins with a request, be not silent. So it seems that God is not doing what he's supposed to be doing in this case. So that's kind of a complaint as well. God, say something, do something. Notice the term of address, O God of my praise. The psalm begins with acknowledging that God is worthy of our praise. The psalm will conclude with praise as well, so make note of that. The complaint begins in verse 2, the wicked and deceitful mouths are opened against me, speaking against me with lying tongues. They encircle me with words of hate. They attack me without cause. And notice how while God is silent, the enemies of the psalmist are quite vocal. So there's a very obvious attempt there by the poet to make that connection, that I'm hearing the sounds of my enemies quite loudly. And notice the real complaint here is that of injustice, that in return for my love, they accuse me, but I'm a man of prayer. They reward me evil for good, hatred for my love. So it's the injustice of it. It's, God, I am doing the right thing here, and I'm getting nothing but bad in return. Here's the first of the curses, verse 6, appoint a wicked man against him. Let an accuser stand at his right hand. So let him experience what I'm experiencing. I've got a wicked man coming against me. Let him experience that. Let him have that, know what it feels like. When he is tried, let him come forth guilty. Let his prayer be counted as sin. Wow, that's pretty strong. But he's saying, let him go on trial. Let him be tried. Let there be an accuser speak. Put him in my shoes for a minute. That's all I'm asking, God. May his days be few. May another take his office. Now, this suggests this is someone in leadership, someone in David's cabinet, in his administration in some way, but praying that he'd be deposed from his office. And notice how the writers of the New Testament pick this up. The apostles are discussing what to do about Judas. And they quote the book of Psalms first with, this is Psalm 69, a very strongly messianic psalm that points us to the cross. And then they quote a bit of this one, let another take his office. And so borrowing from that, you get a sense that when the disciples thought about Judas and this man who was one of their companions for 3 years, it was one of the inner circle, was eyewitness to everything that Jesus did, and yet stabbed him in the back, betrayed him with a kiss. You can understand perhaps why they went to this psalm when they thought about Judas as the betrayer, as the backstabber whose words ultimately brought down Jesus, the one they loved. Now, of course, we understand God's sovereignty and all of that, but this is where they were at in the book of Acts. They said, let another take his place of office. Let's replace him. And so they replace him with Matthias. Interesting use of that text, I might add. And then verses 9 through 15 are a continuation of the curses. And what is so difficult about this particular section is that the psalmist is not only calling for the destruction of his enemies, but he's calling for the extinction of his family, his legacy. May his children be fatherless, and his wife a widow, so may he die, right? Then may his children wander about and beg, seeking food far from the ruins they inhabit. So may their house fall into ruin and the children become beggars. Now, why is it the children's fault? Why should they suffer? May the creditor seize all that he has. May strangers plunder the fruits of his toil. Let there be none to extend kindness to him, nor any pity to his fatherless children. So don't even show pity to his orphans? Come on. May his posterity be cut off. May his name be blotted out in the second generation. Like, be quickly forgotten should this man be. May the iniquity of his fathers be remembered before the Lord, and let not the sin of his mother be blotted out. So don't forgive his parents. Like, there is that thinking we find in scriptures at times where it's the sins of the parents are revisited on the children. And so this is suggestion that this man did what he did because of his parents' sin, this generational curse. And so we're going back to his parents, his grandparents, just as the curse is being called upon his children and his grandchildren. Let them be before the Lord continually, that he may cut off the memory of them from the earth. So we have here in verses 9 through 15 probably the strongest imprecation in the entire book of Psalms. And you have to ask yourself, this kind of generational curse on the descendants, what place is there for that in Christian theology when Jesus said to love our enemies and pray for those who are our enemies? So we have to wrestle with a text like this. And I think the first thing I would ask is, are there people that really deserve such justice? Is there such a thing as an evil person? And certainly we could look through history and we see brutal dictators. We can name, the Hitlers and the Mao Zedongs and the Stalins and the body count and say, yeah, I think someone like that deserves this. Perhaps we could do that. Perhaps we could even think in our own modern times of child molesters, of pornographers, of serial killers, of human trafficking. There is evil, terrorism. There is human evil, and perhaps it's appropriate to just pour out anger and frustration towards them. But notice what David is doing here. He is not taking matters into his own hands. And this is true of every imprecation. The psalmist never says, God, give me the strength to cut off the head of my enemy. It's always, God, you do justice. You're the judge. You do what's right. You settle this. I relinquish my right to do that. It's really important to remember, no matter how violent the imprecations are, these curses, it is up to God ultimately to do justice. The complaint returns in verse 16, for this man did not remember to show kindness. He pursued the poor and needy, the brokenhearted. He put them to death. So this man is being judged for how he treated the poor, the vulnerable, the brokenhearted. He shed innocent blood. He put them to death. And the curses then continue. He loved to curse. Let curses come upon him. He didn't delight in blessing. May blessing be far from him. He clothed himself with cursing as his coat. May it soak into his body like water, like oil into his bones. So may he get what he gave out. May he receive what he gave to others. Verse 19, may it be like a garment that he wraps around him, like a belt that he puts on every day. May this be the reward of my accusers from the Lord, those who speak evil against my life. So it is a prayer for retribution, a prayer for justice, for the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth approach to justice, that he would get what he gave to others, what he sowed, that he would also reap. The psalmist continues with a request, but you, O God, my Lord, deal on my behalf for your name's sake, for your glory, for your praise, because of your steadfast love, deliver me. Here's the complaint again. I am poor and needy. My heart is stricken. I'm gone like a shadow at evening, reminiscent of Psalm 102. I'm shaken off like a locust. My knees are weak through fasting. My body is gaunt, no fat, skin and bones. I'm an object of scorn. They see me. They wag their heads. They mock me. So psalmist is deeply wounded here. And I think it's important also to realize that when a person is deeply wounded in this way, anger is natural. Think about how an animal, when it's been wounded, is its most dangerous, when it's most likely to strike back. And so the psalmist here, David, is deeply wounded, and so we shouldn't be surprised at how viciously he is striking back against his enemies with his words. The request returns in verse 26, help me, O Lord my God, save me according to your steadfast love. Another reference to the love of God. Let them know that this is your hand, O Lord, that you have done it. So again, justice is God's, not the psalmist. And then we have a very important summary statement, I think, when it comes to these songs of imprecation. Let them curse, but you will bless. They arise and are put to shame, but your servant will be glad. God, they may curse me, but you will bless me. They're going to be put to shame, and I will rejoice. It is a strong statement of trust. The psalmist has relinquished his right to do vengeance, and he's put that into God's hand. There's one more recapitulation of the curse in verse 29. May my accusers be clothed with dishonor. May they be wrapped in their own shame as a cloak. Back to that metaphor of the cloak that we saw earlier. And then finally, the psalm concludes with worship. With my mouth, I will give great thanks to the Lord. I will praise him in the midst of the throng. I will publicly worship, for he stands at the right hand of the needy one to save him from those who condemn his soul to death. He began his song with praise, and he ends it in the same way. God is worthy of our worship. God is just. We can let go of our anger, of our cursing, and we can entrust that to God who judges justly. Praise be to God.